Welcome to Post Break. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm head of innovation at the PNYA, and I work with Dungeon Beach Post. Today's topic is the New York VFX tax credit. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. She is CEO and executive producer at Phosphene. She's also the chair of the PNYA. Please welcome Vivian Connolly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. We put this together because there have been really substantive and meaningful changes to the New York visual effects credit that were based on client feedback. Basically, the threshold was $3 million or 20% to qualify for the visual effects standalone rebate. And what we were finding several times in a row was that there were things that were shy of that would have landed in New York had they had the threshold, had the barrier for entry been a little bit lower. And so the Post New York Alliance got together after having lots of conversations with all of our clients to see what might be helpful. And we came up with this idea of $500,000 or 10% as a barrier for entry for the independent standalone credit. And the state was unbelievably understanding and cooperative and supported this effort, which allowed us to bring some of the smaller jobs to New York, either a piece of a large job or just a job that all in was $500,000 or less. And I can't speak for the entire visual effects community, but for Phosphene in particular, we're definitely seeing a surge in projects as a result of this change. And we're even seeing some projects that are coming in just under the threshold and that finding a little more work to get us to the threshold, which is fantastic. So I want to thank ESD and New York State for their continued support and understanding even of what post-production means and how important it is. And we're seeing the results of those changes come to bear, but we want to make sure you all understand them, know how to navigate them. And then also we want to hear from you if you're on the studio side or if you're an independent post producer or VFX producer, what's working for you, what isn't working for you, are there any pain points, how is it going for you? So that's why we're here today, to answer any of your questions and to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to throw to Yana Collins Lehman, who was the chair of the Post New York Alliance for 250 years and has now freed herself and is working still with the government and still with the tax credits and still with the lobbying efforts for New York, but sort of in a different capacity in the Post New York Alliance, and she'll introduce everybody from ESD.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for coming. Great to see you all. My name is Yana Collins Lehman. I am the CEO of Trevanna Post. We are a film and television post-production accounting company, and we are intimate with the tax credits, which is why it's quite easy for me to talk about them. And I'm so thrilled to be here with people who I work a ton with from ESD, Empire State Development, Yoni Bokser, who is the executive director and vice president of the New York State Governor's Office of Motion Picture and Television Development and New Media, and Connie McFeeley, the director of Entertainment Tax Credit Programs for ESD. And Lynn, I'm not sure what your title is, but we talk to you all the time, and you're very important at ESD. You're great at answering questions. And those are those three right there. Hi.
Thank you so much, Yana and Vivian, and all of you for hosting us in your work. I know we were muted, so just to clarify, Lynn here is the assistant director. Governor Hochul wants to ensure that New York stays competitive in attracting film and TV production and appreciates all of your input and everyone across the industry as we made changes in the incentive in order to be more strategic. So briefly, just a few highlights, and then we can get to questions. The tax credit was extended for several years through 2028 and has two new initiatives, a Production Plus program to encourage recurrent investment and recurrent productions, a new independent production program, and as you mentioned, the changes to the VFX program to increase additional flexibility. The laws passed this spring and the regulations are currently being developed. So we're happy to take any questions about how we're currently operating, and we'll continue to be in touch as things move forward.
I just want to clarify that the original visual effects tax credit passed in 2013, and this year is the first time we took another look and made a big revision. So effective January 1st, 2025. So all applications submitted on or after January 1st, 2025 is what these changes are applicable to. And specifically, we have essentially, I think of it as 3 tax credits in New York State as it relates to film and television. The production tax incentive, and any visual effects or post-production you do in New York qualifies under that tax credit. There's no separate threshold that needs to be made. There's the standalone post-production tax credit, and then there's the visual effects animation credit. Post-production tax credit and visual effects animation tax credit have to be applied for separately. They have to meet their own thresholds. And as was mentioned, the current visual effects tax credit, the threshold is now a minimum spend of $500,000 or 10% of the visual effects budget, whichever is less. So much easier to get into now than it was before. And let's get into some questions.
Before we do,
Oh,
I just wanted to mention that for post-production itself, the threshold is 75% of all qualified post costs have to have been paid or incurred in New York State. But there's an alternative threshold of $1 million in qualified spend. So for some projects that were white knuckling it at 74.78%, they have an option now.
everyone can breathe easier.
Yeah, and VFX is similar in that it's 500,000 qualified spend, or you can have 10% of all qualified VFX in New York.
So Justin's question is, that's 500,000 in qualified spend in New York, correct? If there's outsourcing, that would not count towards the 500,000 threshold, correct? That's correct, Justin.
Right.
Anything outside of New York is not eligible for the credit and does not help with the threshold.
Well, no, it counts against on the threshold, right? So you'd have to do,
Right.
you have a budget that's less than 500,000 and you're doing 700,000 total VFX, you'd have to do 70,000 or more in New York State in order to qualify for the program. As an example.
So we sent along 3 questions in advance of today. Just looking for those.
One of them was about, just while you look, one of them was about visual effects insert shoots happening in New York during production. So not during post-production, but for elements that will be used in visual effects. There was one client who is shooting in Sydney, but was going to do a visual effects insert shoot for elements to be used in visual effects in New York that would have hit the $500,000 threshold, but wasn't sure if that was a qualified spend.
I think the general approach that we're taking is that if an applicant is applying for the VFX credit and all the VFX activity hits the $500,000 of qualified spend, then de facto, all those VFX costs are qualified.
This is the show that asked me was a show that isn't doing their visual effects here, but is doing a shoot for tons of insert elements that will be used in post later. So they're shooting visual effects elements here, not doing the rest of visual effects here, but they're spending $500,000. So it sounds like you're saying that would qualify, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, if it's in their VFX budget and they're doing the work in New York, and they're hitting the $500,000 in qualified costs, then those costs are qualified for the credit.
So some of this is also philosophical. This is a debate that we have amongst ourselves. Are plate shoots considered production, or are plate shoots considered visual effects? And I think what Connie is saying, which makes a lot of sense, is plate shoots are considered visual effects if the show is considering them visual effects, because they're included in the visual effects budget, which is separate from the production budget, and they're being used for visual effects. So I think it's really matters where it's budgeted.
Yeah, and Lynn and I were actually having that very discussion right before this meeting, and we both agreed that what you said is what it is.
It's what Trevanna and ESD talks about at lunch, just another question we got in advance of today's meeting was, so production is outside New York, but post and visual effects were in New York. Wait, I think that one
That's the one we just talked
that's
about.
the one we just answered.
Yeah.
So this other one is if production is outside New York, but the visual effects supervisor is New York based and preps in New York, does that time in New York qualify for the visual effects rebate?
Yeah, yes, short answer, yeah.
Great.
As you said, that job is going to be in the VFX budget.
You do have to apply before you can incur qualified costs in New York, so.
This is a very important point that bears repeating, is that there really isn't any necessarily a deadline for when you have to submit your visual effects application, but no spend before the application is submitted will qualify. And we at Trevanna, we suggest that everybody just apply for it, because you never know. Well, you do know, and sometimes you don't know what your visual effects plans are going to wind up being. So it's better to just have your application in and assume, especially now that it's so easy to qualify for the credit, it's better to just have it in. Better safe than sorry.
And Yana, if someone applies, there's no commitment to use it, right?
Mm-mm.
Great.
No necessity to submit a final. Another question came in: do any of the plus programs apply to visual effects only? So I think that question is if a company has made it into the production plus, so a major studio, publicly traded, is now qualified for the 10% uptick in credit. Can that studio apply it to a post only application or a visual effects only application? And same question about the Indie Plus program. Is that?
No, if an applicant submits a project for the production program, all the costs, through the final elements are eligible for the production plus. But if it's those two programs don't pertain to post-production, so.
Okay. Important distinction.
And if you're on this call and if that's an obstacle for you in any way, feel free to email me your thoughts. And we can work with you to the extent that we can, but for now, this is the way the bill is stated. But if you have concerns about that, if you're one of the people who reached out to me, feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat.
And Connie and Lynn and Yoni, have you seen an increase in submissions of VisFX animation only credits in the last? I mean, you wouldn't see any yet, but is it an undersubscribed program?
It's not undersubscribed by any means, but haven't looked at the applications recently to see if, and compared it to, because it's been such a short period, we would look at it more on a quarterly or annual basis.
Yeah, I think it's a little too soon
Too
to
soon to
tell.
tell.
But, it's $45 million. It goes fast, interestingly enough.
Seems like so much money until it isn't. Have you seen any or noticed any pitfalls in visual effects credit application? Any recurring mistakes or any oversight, any pain points for you on that end that we can caution future applicants to avoid?
I think it's gone pretty smoothly. We updated the budget cost qualifier to make it easier for people to enter their budget because we were having difficulty telling what they intended to do out of state versus in state. So now you enter it by line item, and I think that's going fairly smoothly. And as always, it's about understanding the rules. The initial application process is intended to educate people, and it's working that way. So we're here to answer questions.
Great. Anybody have any other questions? It truly is a very simple program, very basic. Someone wrote me, a visual effects facility owner who also has a place upstate and wondered if visual effects work like labor upstate, if that would receive the labor bump that post only and production receives if it's in one of the qualifying counties.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. You wanna?
Well, I'll start. I mean, there are two, north of Westchester and Rockland, there's an additional 5% credit on all qualified costs, including labor. And then, as I said, north of Westchester and Rockland, there's also an additional 10% bump on qualified labor, which is qualified labor direct hires. Not, vendor labor, but direct hires.
So to be specific to the person who asked that question, you would want typically that would just go on their vendor invoice, but if they had the show directly pay their employees or their artists, then it would get a 10% credit, an additional 10% credit.
Yeah, if they were direct hires.
Right.
Yeah.
Meaning the production directly hires them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the labor that's included in, any vendor's invoice automatically gets the 5%, but if they were paid directly, they'd get 15. Or they'd get 10. Sorry.
Right, so you can get a maximum of 45% for a direct hire, wages and fringe upstate. And I saw a question in the chat asking if they had to apply for VFX before the production started or at any time during post. Is that what the question said?
It says, does the visual effects only credit have to be filed before the production starts or just before visual effects starts?
Before qualified spend starts. So yes, you should apply when you want to start. The earlier, the better, I think. I agree with Yana on that.
Right, because it is a bummer when we have to tell people like, yeah, all that visual effects, like previs and everything that you did before your application, it just doesn't qualify because it has to be the date of the application. Thanks, Laura.
This is sort of anomalous, but it happened twice recently in that applicants didn't start. The 180-day rule applies to post-production as well as to the production program, so that you have to start spending qualified costs within 180 days of applying. So as I said, it's kind of anomalous. It doesn't happen very often, but if there's some untoward event or a change in plans, people who've already applied should be mindful of the fact that they have to keep track, of if they started spending qualified costs 185 days after their initial application was submitted, they would be ineligible. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind.
And I just want to add, I know earlier we talked about the independent film production program. The next application window will be in January. So if people have an interest in that, they should get ready and prepare for that. The state will have an info session between now and then, and we can make sure if you email us at NYFilm that we are looping you into that info session for any questions about that application process.
Thank you. So just to reiterate, a question has come up that post-production and visual effects, so post only and visual effects are two separate applications.
No, one
No.
application.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go,
Jinx,
go, go.
jinx.
If you have if you applied for the post only credit and you didn't apply for the visual effects credit, your visual effects expenses do not qualify within the post only. Do they, or are they excluded? They're excluded. It's two separate.
But go.
It's always been my understanding that we have one post-production application. And you fill out, initial applicants up front show how they met the they show, if they're only applying for VFX, they show how they met they anticipate, the VFX threshold. And if it's post only, or if it's post and VFX, it is one application. So if you started out doing post and you didn't plan to have any VFX, but it turned out that you needed it for some reason or wanted it, when you submit your final application, you could submit those VFX costs and they would be eligible, qualified for the credit.
Without having submitted a VisFX application.
But I guess we think of it differently because why don't you?
Yeah, it's one single application. And initial application, you provide an estimate of what you think you're going to spend. And if you thought you were going to only do post in New York, then you would tell us like, here's where we're going to be. But then on the final application, you're submitting what you actually spent. And if plans changed and you did VFX work in New York and it was enough qualified work to meet the threshold, then that could qualify on the final application for a credit.
Okay. However, if you apply for the post only and wind up doing some visual effects and it doesn't meet you do $450,000 of visual effects, then your visual effects spend, it no longer gets absorbed by the post only application, which is why I try to use the language, it's two separate applications, even though it's really one application, it's two separate thresholds. In other words, your post only threshold cannot include your visual effects spend.
Yeah. Right, so it's two separate thresholds, that's correct, on one application.
Okay.
I think that bears repeating one more time because that might have been confusing.
Okay. Because the question came in, can you clarify if you have the post only credit but didn't apply for the VisFX credit, do VisFX expenses qualify within the post only or are they excluded? And the answer to that is if you meet the VisFX threshold, in other words, if you spend $500,000 or if you spent 10% of your visual effects budget, then it is included. It can be included in your post only credit.
That's it.
Ding, ding, ding.
So there's two ways I just want to make sure I'm just going to drill down on it. I'm sorry if it's redundant, but the 75% post only threshold is something that people are nervous about protecting. And that's why visual effects has this other qualifying number to hit so it doesn't negatively impact the 75% threshold, right? Or am I complicating things for no reason?
Sometimes it negatively affects it, sometimes it positively affects it. It's truly 6 of one, half a dozen of the other in that regard.
But if you had
It's
less than
similar.
5, sorry, go ahead.
A post is similar in that you could just spend 1 million now in post. And it didn't, you wouldn't have to hit the 75% threshold then, as long as 1 million qualified was spent in New York, post is qualified in New York.
But
If you were
regardless-
January 1st, 2025.
And I would spend 1 million and one. I mean, just the fact that, you know, everybody's diligent in completing their application, but we do have a CPA, AUP process that's available for post, or you can submit the final directly to us. But if there are any non-qualified costs that wormed their way into the application somehow, you know, you have to be prepared in all across the board, but you know, you could go below the threshold when your final application is audited either by CPA or internally by us.
Better safe than sorry.
Spend more.
Right. Okay, so just to make sure this is super clear, the visual effects application is only needed if you aren't doing your whole post in New York. If you're applying for, if you only want the credit on your visual effects spend, then yes, you have to submit a visual effects application. And you cannot, if you have a post only credit and you spend less than 500,000 on visual effects, that 500,000 will not qualify. You will not get the credit on that.
Depends on your whole VFX budget.
Right. If you still have to meet the visual effects threshold in your post only budget. If you go through post only, you cannot spend less than 500,000 or 10% of your visual effects budget if you meet the 75% post. Two separate thresholds. Thresholds. Sometimes one application, it's basically like the application is like a check mark that's like, and we're also applying for the visual effects only credit, but I still think of it as two separate applications, essentially.
And there's a separate BCQ for animation.
Right. Okay, let's get to these other questions. Thank you for submitting them, guys. Can you, ESD, re-explain this upstate possibility of 45%? What is that scenario?
Well, if you're planning on posting upstate completely or in part, the costs, and by upstate, we're talking about north of Rockland and Westchester, so all the upstate counties. If you get an additional 10% on qualified labor, which are direct hires, and in addition to that, you get an additional 5% on all qualified costs across the board. And that includes labor as well. So you'd be getting, and the 30% base credit is their building blocks on top of the 30% base credit. So you're getting 30 plus 15% additional is the maximum credit that you could get, which is, as Lynn said, 45%.
You know, what really makes it clear is if you go to the website that Laura put in the chat, there's a map which explains it.
So so imagine, for example, so American High, right? In Syracuse.
Right.
American High, they're a studio in a high school. They make like John Hughes style, lower budget shows. So if you do post only up there, in Syracuse or in Buffalo, you already are getting 35% because you're upstate. So what you would be getting 30% in New York City, now that you're in those counties upstate, it's 35%. And you are directly paying the labor, which automatically gives you an additional 10%, which is how it comes to 45%. So it's not 45% across the board. And it would be, I have to say, very difficult for visual effects to accomplish this, because visual effects labor is typically paid by the visual effects vendor. And this does not apply to vendors. This only applies to direct paid labor. And when we say direct paid labor, what we mean is they fill out a time card. They are crew. They are considered crew of the specific production. So perhaps the visual effects supervisor's labor would be getting a 45% credit, but the person doing rotoscoping, very hard to make that all happen. Hopefully that makes
Right, so the baseline for, you know, cutting and doing complete post-production or any part of post-production in upstate New York is that the baseline is that you would get the baseline 30%, but you'd get 5% additional on all your costs, all your vendor costs, even if you had no direct hires at all. So you'd get a 35% credit. And then the bonus is an additional 10% on your direct hire labor.
right. Another question, is our VisFX only credit unique to New York, or do other states have competitive ones? New Jersey has a digital media credit, but there are not very many visual effects facilities in New Jersey. And I don't know of any other states that have them. Thank you, Laura, for putting in those helpful links. Please, everybody, save those. That is just a wealth of information that Laura put in the chat. Just to also clarify, if you don't do post in New York, but you spend $500,000 or 10% of your VisFX budget, you can still qualify, and it's the same application. That is correct. Yes, correct. And the percentage is 30%. 30% credit for that, unless you are a facility in an upstate county. Like I was going to open a visual effects company in Buffalo and call it Lake Effects, and I could offer you a 35% credit if I did that, but I did not do that. But someone should do that because it's a great name for a visual effects company in Buffalo. Anyone have any more questions? Thank you so much, everyone, for those questions. And also thank you, Laura, for the helpful links. Those are very good to have. The ESD website has gotten quite good. Also, the post, if you go to postnewyork.org, we have a little Q&A about the visual effects tax credit and the post-only tax credit. That is very helpful, and also with many links to ESD.
Can I I'm getting some text with some questions. I was just going to jump in. If you're shooting in New Jersey and you're doing post elsewhere, but you want to do your visual, I know the answer to this, but I just want to say that loud. And you want to do your visual effects in New York, there's nothing about shooting in New Jersey that precludes that. So as long as you're spending 500,000 or 10% of your visual effects budget in New York, and as long as you apply before you're doing your visual effects, you can do only your visual effects in New York if you want to.
Right.
Okay. Just saying it out loud for somebody else.
We'll answer this question. So back to the upstate. How much of the labor needs to be upstate? Could a show that shoots in New York City direct hire a visual effects team upstate and get the 45%? Or does the production also need to happen up there?
Are they talking about an application to the post program or an application to the film or to the production program?
It sounds like the production, because in this scenario, a show is shooting in New York City, and they're talking about direct hiring a visual effects team upstate, would that get the 45%? Would the labor on that visual effects team, if it was directly hired and they were
No.
doing their work up in Buffalo for a production credit, would that, the production doesn't need to happen there?
But the credits that we outlined, the total 45%, are directly related to the post-production tax credit program. So the production program, it really starts with where you're shooting. And if the production was shooting a majority of principal photography in upstate New York, they'd be getting an additional 10% above the base credit on production labor and production costs, excluding labor.
Right, that's right. The 5% bump is only for post-production.
Right. Right.
Yeah, production doesn't get it. So if you shoot in New York City, the most credit you can get all the way up in Buffalo is a 40% labor credit. Forgot about that.
We have a different math on our website for the production credit.
But no, you don't get an additional, like, do you get an additional bump just for costs if you go in certain places for just production? Like when you shoot in Buffalo, it's still just 30% or it's 35%?
Well, if you're shooting the majority of your principal photography in upstate, then you get not only the 10% on labor, which you would get even if you weren't shooting the majority of your project upstate, but you get 10% on your production costs as well.
Ah,
So if you shoot upstate, but you don't shoot the majority of the project upstate, you get 10% on labor, on direct hires for the labor done upstate, in upstate. If you're shooting the majority of your project upstate, you get 10% on labor, plus you also get 10% on production costs. So you have a 40% baseline credit in upstate if you're shooting the majority up there.
And as long as you have to spend 500,000, right?
Yeah. Plus, like if you were filming the majority of it upstate, but then you came to New York City for post-production, then that would get 30%. So it's where the work is physically done in New York. It's not that you're up there. Yeah, the post-production people have to be upstate to get it.
if a major studio has qualified for the 10% uptick, do they get like 50% credit in that scenario? Lord have mercy.
40%.
They get 40% plus 10%.
So if anyone has any other questions, we're always available. People can reach out to us.
So good to see you guys. Thank you so much for your great questions. And you might have a think and come up with more questions. I'm always happy to be called or emailed, yana@trevanna.com. These nice people at ESD also, very friendly, always happy to answer questions. So if this chat winds up churning something up that hits you later, please, we're talking about this all the time. As we said, we are theorizing about this stuff at lunch over at Trevanna and over at ESD. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. But really, thank you so much for taking the time to get some clarification on all this stuff, you guys.
Thanks. Okay. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.